Okay, time for another Middle Liberation Army member. Okay, so this one that I'm actually going to do is actually kind of just my favorite Middle Liberation Army member, just because I think she's kind of interesting and she has an interesting quirk, and she very much is very much a very in-depth journalist and very thorough with her interviews. Um, very much so. As you probably guessed by the title and the thumbnail and what I just said, this video is going to be about Curious, or her real name is, and I'm probably going to botch this as I usually tend to with names that I haven't heard enough, and I apologize for anyone that actually has this name or knows how to pronounce it. Chitso Kizuki. And she is, of course, her code name for the Middle Liberation Army is, of course, Curious. And she is one of the executive directors of the Shueisha Publishing, who is also secretly one of the leading members of course, the Meta Liberation Army. And her quirk, or meta ability, as they refer to them, is called Landmine, which is actually kind of interesting. Her quirk allows her to turn anything that she touches basically into a landmine. She can turn anything that she touches into an explosive, whether that be objects or people, the ground, certain aspects of it, different things like that. Anything that she's touched, she can basically activate and turn into an explosive. Add explosive properties onto it. And we see her do this with various aspects of things. We see her do this with during her main fight with Toga. I'll go over a bit more in detail what happens during the fight when I get into her actual discussion, but I just kind of wanted to go over her quirk first for a basic layout of that. As a kid, it's called Explosion, or it's called a Landmine. Now, I have talked about Curious before, back when I did my Villains That Have Died video. She was one of the ones that I talked about as well, along with Twice and a few others. So I have talked about her before, but now I actually get to talk more in depth about her, and I actually get to show more pictures because of the anime, so yay. Also, I just really like her design. She's got blue skin, which is always interesting in my opinion. She has, purple hair. Again, I like purple. As again, she also has I like her quirk or meta ability. And I just like her design overall and everything. So basically what we have with her for her quirk, as I said, is it allows her to turn anything that she's touched into explosives. We see her do this by turning parts of the ground into explosives when she is battling Toga, and when she turns some of her followers, or her Curious Squad, into living bombs, so that way they explode. And that I'm just going to go over a whole other element of in regards to when I talk about the Meta Liberation Army warriors. They're going to have their own video. But she has that, and she also uses it to turn like the back alley of like the area where she's fighting Toga. Like I think she's like touched, like probably walked down the entire alley and just like touched everything, and she can like set everything off. I'm assuming as long as I'm assuming it's like as long as the item is still within either a certain range of her, or as long as she has touched it within a certain amount of time. We haven't gotten any limitations onto what she can and can't explode, or how long it has to be before it explodes, or how far away from her it can get before it is no longer an explosive. I would assume that there are limits to it, because there are limits with most any of the quirks. I would assume that like her limit is probably if it's been so long since she's touched an item, even if she activated her quirk on it, like I'm assuming if it's been like months or years probably after she like touched an item, even if she endowed it with the explosive properties, if she never exploded it, I'm assuming it probably can no longer explode. And I'm assuming that like anything that she has touched, as I stated, since she died, I'm assuming most of the things that even if she had set them up to be explosives, probably can't explode anymore because she's dead now. I guess by that logic, anything that like Momo created with her quirk probably vanishes, but I don't think that that's the case. In regards to that, because I don't think Momo stuff vanishes, but I would assume that there is also like a time limit onto how long Curious's quirk will last on something, how long that effect will last before it is no longer possible to explode. Or at the very least, by technicality, because she's dead, either that results in either it just explodes instantly because she died, so her power is no longer there to stop it from exploding, so anything else that she'd set up to be an explosive already blew up, or she had it becomes inert. Whether or not it can still explode or not is regardless, because if I apologize if you hear the dog whining in the background, even if she has something that she like touched in the past, like we'll go with Blue because I have Blue as an example here. We have Stitch here. I don't want to blow up Stitch. I'm sorry, but he's the closest thing that I had. Beyond my water bottle, but Stitch is blue and also kind of indestructible, so he's fine. So by her quirk's power, if she wanted to, she could touch Stitch and then set him somewhere, and then like so many hours or whatever later, she could make it explode. This is a bad thing, but I'm assuming that either with her quirk, it's either like even if she didn't explode something before she died, if she like touched Stitch and then like set it aside somewhere, and then she died, either Stitch will then explode no matter where he was, as long as it's still active on him, or even if it was affected by her quirk, since she's dead, it can't explode anymore. Even if you like, I don't know. Well, I mean, if you like lit a lighter next to it or set up like a, a trigger, it would probably necessarily explode anyway. But we don't know the exact full setup of that. But the other thing that she has is also her equipment. She has her Curious Flattener, which when I first read it in the manga, I think I read it as Curious Flatterer, which I'm like, she's an interviewer, she's a journalist. Flattering people is to a degree part of what she's supposed to do. So that made sense in my mind, but it's Flattener. What it is it's basically it is part of the Detronat, support items that her and a bunch of the other members of the Liberation Army have. I think it sits basically as like a chain bracelet around her wrist, and then like it pops open and it will cover her hand, and like it looks like a steel cover of some kind that she can then use to like punch. And she can also like send her quirk through it. So I think we see her like punch Toga with it at one point, and like it also explodes in Toga's face. So she can use it as like a defensive mechanism as well. And it's probably something that's been specifically worked on for her. So there's not really too much else there with that in regards to like her equipment, but I'll be going over different ways that she uses the equipment and her explosions, her landmine quirk, now, since I'm going to talk about her history. So we don't know if she was like born in Dacus City. I don't think we ever got any of that information, or if she was born into the Meta Liberation Army at some point in time. Not sure exactly. I don't think we've gotten that amount of backstory on really any of them. And the most I think we've got backstory on is Reed Destro, which I went over in his video. But we see that at one point she was recruited, or at the very least joined the Liberation Army, the Meta Liberation Army, under Redestro, and he kind of helped her come out of her shell as a journalist. She very much used statistics and figures and everything like that, and very dry commentary and stuff, and he encouraged her to be much more, to work much more with her subjects, works on interviewing murders, works on, as he put it, articles that will guide public opinion and must contain human heart, so it'll like influence people's opinions on things. And, so that's what she did. She went much more further down that path, much more building up her own self-confidence in the aftermath of things in regards to that. And from there, she, of course, just built up more and more. She has this publishing empire that she uses, and she uses this to currently distribute the Meta Liberation War book that was, of course, originally written by Destro, who is, of course, the founder of the Meta Liberation Army, and she uses the books to, procreate and continue on the legacy that he put down and everything, to, like, introduce it to people and everything, introduce this idea of the Meta Liberation Army and the ability to liberate your meta abilities and use them as you see fit, not necessarily as the law sees fit. Or that, more along the lines, of course, she's the one that subscribes to the fact that, people should be allowed to use their quirk how they wish. You don't have to have rules and regulations into what you're doing with your quirk. Um, and we see her do that and everything, and she writes all these different articles about the hero industry and everything like that. And she, of course, does probably a fair amount of work on writing about like Detronat and Destro as his his very much his Ryukia persona, his Detronat, the runner owner of CEO of Detronat and everything. And what we have for the main interaction that we have with her is, of course, during the battle with the Meta Liberation Army arc, which is where, of course, the League of Villains are battling against, in Deka City against the Meta Liberation Army. And what we have is, of course, Curious ends up fighting against Toga, and it's basically like her squad versus Toga. And what we see throughout the course of the fight is Curious is basically trying to get like an interview out of Toga, which I'm like, okay, you get dedication points there, woman. And she has all of Curious has like all of these different minions, her warriors around her Curious squad. That she has around her that she uses to like defend herself while she's also attacking Toga and trying to interview her and everything like that. And these are probably ones that she's like specifically picked out. She also has several of them set to explode. And one of the things that we see happen is that Curious reveals that she went after Toga started to go down this life of psycho, that she went and interviewed her parents and went and interviewed her former classmates and teachers and such like that had seen the way that Toga acted, that had seen the way that she was, and had much more of this idea of like the way that Toga had grown up. She also states that like, because of your quirk, you had this fascination with blood, and that because of that, it was looked down upon for you to want to do anything with that quirk, to like want to use your quirk the way that you wanted to. We get disturbing images of Toga. I may end up doing a video about Toga at some point, just with as much as we've gotten about her background recently, gotten about her in the manga and in the anime and such. But so Curious is going over the story, and she's like interviewing Toga, and like Toga's just basically running around being attacked a whole bunch, and just getting Curious has set up all of her different landmine quirk all over the place, and like it keeps exploding on different areas where like Toga lands. So I'm assuming that what happened was like, when they're getting everything set up for the battle, that like Curious was like, okay, well, this is going to be the area where I'm going to pick to fight Toga, so she has the advantage of home field advantage, and like I know this area, and probably most everybody that lives in Deka City knows who everybody else is, knows what everybody's quirks are, knows how to work together really, really well and everything like that. And so she probably walked around and like touched a bunch of the different area around them, different parts of the ground, different parts of the fence and doors and sidewalk and building and different things like that within like a certain radius. And like she probably told her team to focus her that way or focus her this way or something like that, to focus her towards these things that I've touched and set up. And then like walked around, like walked through a building and touched a bunch of different things, a whole don't know if there's a limit to how many things she can set up. I mean, like we know with Uraraka's quirk with zero gravity, and I'll go over that one a little bit, with the zero gravity, that there is a limit to how much that she can lift before it starts affecting her, and how high she can send it to a degree before it really starts affecting her in an adverse way. Curious, probably like a lot of the other members of the Meta Liberation Army, has probably been training ever since she joined in how to use her quirk, which, in all honesty, would actually be a very good quirk for a hero to have. There's a fair amount of the quirks that are within the Meta Liberation Army, particularly Curious's and Redestro's, and I would also say Gettin's, I'll go over Gettin in a different video, that their quirks would actually be quite good to use for a hero to have, and be able to use it that way. Her being able to turn different things into landmines would be very good for her to, use. I apologize if you're a door opening and closing. That's probably my mom. But, so we see different things like that, her quirk would be very good to use as like a hero. So it's like, oh, well, I just have random objects on me, and I just, I touch them and then I throw them at the enemy and they explode. That would be a very useful thing to have. Kind of like the way that Bakugo is with his sweat, but still. You have much more control of like, oh, I slipped something into your costume and now it's going to explode type of thing. But we see her fighting against Toga, and like Toga's just getting beaten to all get out at this point in time. She even uses her syringe mask combination that she has to like try to drink blood from a bunch of Curious's warriors, and then the blood explodes. Well, it's inside Toga because they explode because they literally let Curious turn them into bombs, which is very disturbing in and of itself. And again, that will be gone over a bit more when I talk about the warriors. But Curious is trying to get this interview out of Toga, and she's like gaining information, and like Toga's giving her very, very useful information. I'm assuming to a degree, just like either confirming or denying based on the way that she's acting or the way that she's responding. And of course, they have like cameras all over the place in Deka City, so they can very much get any of the information they need from like what Toga says or anything like that. And Curious says something along the lines of, why don't you just want to be normal? And Toga says, well, what's normal? And that's where we have like that very dichotomous thing there. And one of the things that happens is, of course, Curious is, of course, stating that she wants to goad Toga, and she's trying to use Toga basically to turn her into like a martyr. And what she wants to do is she wants to like write Toga's story and use that as kind of like a version of like, well, one of the ways that they refer to it as is like our holy book or holy scriptures or holy texts or something like that, to use as an example of what happens when people are denied the right to use their quirk the way that they are kind of, the way that the instincts from their quirk are telling them to do it. In regards to the fact that, oh, we need this to happen, or we need that to happen, or this needs to happen, or that needs to happen, or, Toga's quirk wants her to, drink people's blood, and also random small birds, which is sad. But, I mean, I'm sure she can find someone that would enjoy her to do that or something along those lines. But, her quirk also means that she can shift into that person and, she can then pretend to be that person as she did with Kami. But moving away from that, Curious's intention is to use Toga as this kind of martyr / holy / saint-like figure that she wants to use. And we even get this like one moment where after like Toga's taken a whole bunch of damage and she's just, she's just kind of almost out of it to a degree. And like we get this like very interesting image of like Curious holding her, and it's based off it's either in reference to or is based off of a moment that is a statue that I believe is done by Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo. I think it's Michelangelo. That is, it's based off of a statue of Mary holding, the crucified body of Jesus. And in the anime, they very much highlight this, where like it looks like Curious with like a bunch of her, squad standing around her, like she's holding Toga in a similar fashion. And then from that's when like Toga kind of snaps a little bit, gets like an adrenaline rush, and she dashes away and she drinks a bit of the blood left that she has from Uraraka, and she shifts into Uraraka, and she basically kind of goes into kind of just overdrive or whatever, and she touches somehow she's also able to like activate using Toga's quirk or using Uraraka's quirk, zero gravity, and she decides that she just basically dashes really quickly because like Toga is very quick on her own, and she like dashes through really quickly, and she like touches a bunch of Curious and a bunch of her different followers, and then she, using zero gravity, is able to lift them into the air and is then basically able to lift them and then drop them, and they die because they just fell so far and smashed into the ground. And we see this, and we see this by like Curious's point of view is like, wait a second, I was only told that she could shift into people. Did she just level up right now while we were fighting because she saw her drink Ochako's blood and then turn into Ochako? And she makes a comment of, oh, you want to look cute when you die. It's like, side note, my niece, unfortunately, my niece likes My Hero Academia. That's not a bad thing. My niece is perfectly welcome to watch My Hero Academia. But she unfortunately kind of really likes Toga, and I'm like, no, No, no. I love you, but no. Don't do that. Don't, no. Go be like Ochako. Go be like Su. Go be like Momo. Go be like Mina or Jiro or Hagakure. Go be like one of them. Don't, no, don't try to impersonate Toga. Um, I love you, but please don't. Um, but Curious kind of watches this happen as like Toga basically kind of levels up, and Curious then is killed because Toga used Ochako's quirk, which already is just something that needs to be examined, where she like lifted a bunch of Curious and her squad into the air and then dropped them, and then they die. And Himiko, Toga is just kind of like, she only wants to keep around what she loves. And to a degree, I actually think that like Curious and Himiko or Toga, I go back and forth with that, but Curious and Toga would actually probably have gotten along well if Curious had survived. But Curious is actually the only member of the Meta Liberation Army or the only named member of the Meta Liberation Army at the moment, because definitely hundreds of them die during the whole battle that happened between the Meta Liberation Army and the League of Villains, because we see Shigaraki destroy a bunch of them, we see Dabi burn a ton of them to ash, twice I'm sure kill several of them, or disable several of them. Several of them got blown up by Curious anyway. So, fun there. And then a bunch of them probably got crushed by Jigato Makia. And then, when, Shigaraki, flattened everything, that, probably killed quite a few people there as well. But Curious is the only kind of like named member that we get that died. And in the aftermath of her death, because there is a little bit that comes out of the aftermath of that, of the death of her death, is that, her using her information, Skeptic, who I'm going to be going over in a different video, and it's either going to be him next or Trumpet, one of the two, I don't remember which one, but one of them, and she uses, she probably had like parts of an article written already, and then Skeptic just kind of used that and used the information that she had to like use that to like write about like also her death, but also like what happened in Deka City. And like used things from her like files and everything to like skewer and twist what happened in Deka City, turn it into like, oh, this actually is a good thing that happened, but bad things happened, but this was a good thing, and different things like that, to spin it in their perspective to make it better for them. I don't really think we're going to be learning anything else about Curious. As I said, she is my favorite member of the Meta Liberation Army. I also just like her quirk, and her design, as I stated. She's a little psychotic for me. Although I have read a fan fiction where instead of her being like part of the Meta Liberation Army, she's like a talk show host. And I'm like, okay, I can see that happening. I can very much see that happening. So that's what we have for Curious. As I said, I think the next one is either Skeptic or Trumpet, one of the two, and then it'll be Getten, and then it'll be the Warriors. So I think I'm actually going to get them all recorded in the same day. Also, I have a new shirt that is Kingdom Hearts, and it is Sora in his Halloween Town Christmas costume with one of the Keyblades from the... I think this is the Keyblade from the Christmas section, Christmas Town section of Halloween Town. So that's what I have. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!
Are you not keen on being interviewed, Himiko Toga? I'm afraid that's too bad. I haven't backed down from a good story ever since my first year in this biz. So I hope you understand, Himiko Toga, that I will strip you bare